Chapter 6. The Muppet Show. One idea Jim kept thinking about was a weekly TV show with Muppets. He wanted it to be mainly for grown-ups, but people were used to seeing the Muppets on Sesame Street and thought they were just for kids. In the early 1970s, there were only 3 national TV channels: ABC, NBC, and CBS. Jim pitched his idea to each one. They all said no. The only person interested was a producer in England. He wanted Jim's new show made there. Then later it could be sold to TV stations in America and around the world. Jim agreed. Around this time, Jim changed the name of Muppets Inc. to Henson Associates, HA for short. His company was making a lot of money by now, so he bought a second house for his family in England. He would travel back and forth between London and New York to work on different projects. The British producer wanted a different star to host each episode of Jim's new show. He thought that would appeal to grown-ups. It was hard to get guest stars. The first to say yes was South African actress, dancer, Juliet Prowse. The Muppet Show was set in a theater supposedly owned by Muppets. Each week, they had to put on a new show. They joked around with the guest star. The star would be in a few skits. There were lots of funny problems and silly mistakes along the way. When the Muppets acted up, Kermit kept things under control. It was almost like Kermit and the Muppets were copying what Jim and his crew did to create the TV episodes. In the middle of chaos, Jim and Kermit were both good problem solvers, making sure things worked out okay. Frank Oz said that Jim hardly ever got angry. If Jim was annoyed, he didn't yell. He would just start flipping the pages of a script he was reading or shift in his chair. In 1976, The Muppet Show premiered in the U.S. It was another hit for Jim. The audience for the show was mostly grown-ups, although plenty of kids watched too. There was a big cast, sometimes hundreds of Muppets. That meant lots of puppeteers. Once there weren't enough puppeteers on hand for a crowd scene, so Jim asked visitors, janitors, and stagehands to help by holding one of the puppets. Miss Piggy appeared on the first show and became an instant star. She was glamorous, with blue eyes and long golden hair. She was plushy and knew what she wanted, to be famous and to marry Kermit. And she went after both of her goals, batting her eyelashes and giving karate chops. Frank Oz performed Miss Piggy. He thought that part of the reason she became so popular might have been because of the women's rights movement. The women's rights movement. When Jim was growing up, his mom didn't work outside of the home. Only about 1/3 of American women did in the 1950s. Instead, they were encouraged to get married and have children. Women who did work usually were nurses, teachers, clerks, secretaries, or factory workers. They almost always earned less money than men, even at the very same jobs. If a woman wanted to be an FBI agent or an airplane pilot, she could be told no, just because she was a woman. In the 1960s, women began forming groups, like now, the National Organization of Women, to push for equal rights, just as African Americans had been doing since the mid-1950s. The Equal Pay Act of 1963 and the Civil Rights Act of 1964 were passed to stop unfair treatment of people based on traits they can't change, such as race, religion, and gender. By 1970, the number of working women was up to 43%. By 1980, it was over 50%, and by 2000, about 60% of women had part-time or full-time careers. Over the past 50 years, women have risen to positions of great importance, such as astronauts, doctors, Supreme Court judges, members of Congress, newspaper publishers, and heads of big companies. As The Muppet Show grew in popularity, so did Miss Piggy. Not all of the Muppets were stars. For crowd scenes, whatnots were used. Whatnots were blank Muppet heads. Different eyes, noses, hair, and clothes are added to give them personalities. Jim still performed Kermit and Ralph, and did new Muppets like Dr. Teeth, the rock piano player, and Captain Link Hogthrob of the Pigs in Space skits. Together, Jim and Frank did the Swedish Chef. Jim worked the chef's head with one arm and did his voice. Frank Oz's real hands were the chef's hands. They had a great time. Frank would do something wild and unexpected with the hands, and Jim would have to think fast. Once, Frank made the chef toss a fake chicken through a basketball hoop. After the show was a hit, it was easy to get famous stars to come on. Before each show, Jim and the writers would meet with the star. Jim included the Muppets in the meeting. This helped the star get comfortable talking to the puppets. Jim included his family in things when he could. The very first puppets his 15-year-old daughter Cheryl made were for the show. An artichoke, an asparagus, and a grapefruit. Her older sister Lisa made a tomato puppet. Their fruits and veggies sang a popular song from the 1920s, "Yes, we have no bananas." Jim also included skits on subjects that were important to him. One about a group of forest animals hiding from hunters with guns. A favorite episode of his starred Harry Belafonte, who sang the song "Turn the World Around" with the Muppets. It was about people of all races learning to accept one another. By 1980, The Muppet Show was watched by 235 million people in more than 100 countries. Kermit had hosted The Tonight Show. There was even a giant Kermit balloon in the famous Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade. He and Miss Piggy were on the cover of Life magazine. Then, after 5 seasons, Jim decided to end the show. Why? He wanted to stop while the Muppets were still on top. And that's the end of Chapter 6.